Hello, I'm Jade Barker. Thanks for joining me for your daily dose of arts and culture here on ENCORE. Coming up in today's programme.
Lucinda Childs is certainly one of the major names in dance, and she certainly changed the way that we look at dance today.
A trailblazer, a pioneer of postmodern movement, the grande dame of American dance. My guest today has been widely praised for altering how we perceive performance. Known for her collaborations with musicians, artists and architects, she's won awards in both the US and France. Her production Dance was first seen over 30 years ago, but recently revived and now back on the Paris stage. It's proving as timeless as its creator. Let's go meet American choreographer and dancer Lucinda Childs. Hi Lucinda, welcome to the show. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
Your production Dance is now showing as part of the Festival d'Automne à Paris, or the Autumn Festival in Paris, as it's called in English. It's been called one of the greatest achievements of the 20th century. However, when it first premiered back in 1979, the New York Times called it a failure. Some of the audiences walked out. When do you think it made this transition from failure to some to greatest achievement, and why?
I think that originally one of the things that was shocking was that some of the movement some of the people commented that it wasn't dance, you know, and that there's an athletic quality to the movement because there's a tremendous amount of stamina involved and precision. I think that the music of Phil Glass was not so well known, and I think it was one of the first experiments of sort of mixed media, combining film with dance. Mm-hmm. And I think now people admire the fact that we were doing that at that time, almost 35 years ago. Even though we didn't work in video, of course, we were working in 35mm black and white film. And I don't know, I think that the audiences have changed and people have heard about it and want to see it.
It certainly was extremely groundbreaking at the time. Before we go any further, let's just take a glimpse now at Dance. Well, Dance was a collaboration between, as you said, composer Philip Glass, and we could also see there the video in the background, which was made by visual artist Soloit. How did this collaboration come about to begin with, and what were you hoping to do by incorporating music and video in this way?
Well, up until working on Einstein on the Beach with Robert Wilson and Philip Glass, I worked primarily in alternative spaces, not in a proscenium space, and I didn't use music at all. The dancers were dancing in silence in these so-called alternative spaces, or gymnasium, churches, rooftops, streets, etc. And after being involved in Einstein, Philip Glass and I decided that we wanted to create a production together in a more traditional way in the proscenium setting, and we felt we must turn to an artist to finalize the collaboration. And Soloit was willing to do it, although at first he felt reluctant to contribute a visual element that would interfere with the complexity visually of the dance itself.
Why?
And because he felt that if you're dealing with an abstract form, which my form is, that to put a painting or some sort of drop, it didn't really make sense to him. So that's why he came up with the idea that the decor should be the dancers, and the film he made is of the dancers.
And talking about Einstein on the Beach, you've before have said that was a career-changing moment for you. Why was that?
Because I think the first time seeing Robert Wilson's theatre in 1974, The Letter to Queen Victoria, which I think was also in Paris, you know, many people said, well, you know, you should see it, you should go and see it, see what you think. I loved it. I thought it was just magnificent. I loved the performers, I loved everything about it. And the fact that the theatre was such a contemporary space, was magically changed into such a contemporary space. Everything about it was for me, very much of its time.
Well, let's take a listen now to what the director Robert Wilson and Philip Glass had to say about Einstein on the Beach.
I think most of my work should never be revived. Einstein is a bit different.
These kinds of pieces, they appeal to a younger audience because the language is fresh. The question is, why is the language still fresh 40 years later?
He posed the question there. You touched on it briefly before about how it still appeals to audiences today. However, a lot has changed since it first premiered. Like you said, you were using film, 35mm film, when you first made the production. Why do you think it still resonates?
Well, I think that Philip Glass has become almost like an icon. You know, now everywhere we go, that there are crowds waiting for him. And that's as it should be. I mean, I love this music. I've been listening to it for now 35 years. I never get tired of it. I think it's absolutely beautiful, but that was not the case before. And the same with this kind of dancing, the postmodern movement. I think Cunningham took a long time before audiences really appreciated it, and now the company is still touring, even though he's no longer with us. And it's become, when I see revivals, it's really amazing how the audiences respond now. Very different from how it was a long time ago.
Yeah, it's very interesting. You actually wanted to become an actress, I read, when you were a child. And you have acted in many different performances. Einstein showed or proved that you had that skill. You won an Obie Award for your role in Einstein. Did you want to continue pursuing acting rather than dancing, or why did you decide to go more down the choreography route?
Well, I think that the pivoting point for me would have been the Judson Dance Theatre, which was influenced by, of course, Cunningham and John Cage, where we used text, and I really consider it was, in a way, the birth of performance art, because it was a coming together of dancers, of visual artists, of poets, musicians, all working together, all performing together. And so for me, there was no barrier between one discipline and another at that time.
For people unfamiliar with the Judson Theatre Company, can you explain a bit more about your time while you were there, the sort of things that you were doing?
Yes, well, I guess the main idea was, because of John Cage and the concept of chance, was to step outside the realm of personal choice and give yourself over to what could happen through chance methodology. In other words, decisions were not necessarily your own, how a piece would come together. And also to open up the vocabulary of dance to include pedestrian movement, which was something very unusual at that time.
We've got images of you on stage performing Carnation, where you put in sponges in your mouth and do all sorts of extraordinary things. How did people react to that when you did that?
Well, some of them laughed, which is fine with me. What I was trying to do was, in the spirit of, I guess, following in the Jean Cage and Marcel Duchamp, working with found objects. In this case, working with objects that really don't belong together, and trying to derive movement activity by combining these objects in various ways.
You did, before Judson, though, you were at the Cunningham Academy. How much of an influence has Merce Cunningham had on your work?
Well, I met him in 1959. I was a student in college, and he came as a guest teacher. And it really changed my life. I mean, just after one class, everything became focused on when I could go to the Cunningham studio and when I could go to the classes. And I continued to be interested in acting and theater, and of course, interested in the theater, especially of Robert Wilson. But this really was the turning point for me, a huge turning point for me.
You then, after Judson and this kind of crazy experimentalist period, you then went back to what's called more minimalist style of dance. Why?
I think that I wanted to not necessarily deal with the gimmick of using objects to derive movement activity, but just go back to simple movement structures, walking in space. And some of the early pieces really involved just pedestrian movement, changes of direction, deriving movement activity for the upper body through changes of direction in walking.
You then formed your own dance company back in the early 70s in the US. However, then you moved to France and you've lived here on and off for many, many years. You speak fluent French, as we were talking about before. What spurred that move to France to begin with?
Well, actually, I've never entirely moved here. I've always been based in New York. My company is based in New York, but I've been invited on many, many, many occasions, not just for dance, but also in theater and also in opera. And that's been a wonderful opportunity, but I can't really say that I've lived or moved to France ever. I've just been invited many times.
Do you notice any differences between how France supports the arts compared to the US?
Well, I think that certainly myself and my immediate colleagues, Robert Wilson and Philip Glass, we have done as much work over here, if not more, which has been wonderful for us. I mean, it's been a huge boon for my company to have the opportunity to perform at Théâtre de la Ville and sometimes even to have work produced by the Théâtre de la Ville in the Festival d'automne.
And why is that? Why
Because it's difficult in America. You know, it's difficult for a small independent company struggling and fundraising and so forth, and to provide enough weeks of work for the dancers so that they have a solid career. That's been a big challenge.
Like you mentioned before, you've worked with many operas, particularly in the last few years, in recent years. You're turning 75 next year. I hope you don't mind me saying that. What does the future hold? Do you plan to continue down this line? Do you plan to continue choreographing?
Well, I have enjoyed the possibility in recent years to work on, for example, Baroque operas. This is an enormous challenge for me, finding things that I understand and finding things that I don't understand and figuring out how to understand them. And worked a lot in Strasbourg, recently directing and choreographing Dr. Atomic, and also a Vivaldi opera. And I think, yeah, I would love to continue as long as there are opportunities there. I have 2 projects that I'll be doing with Bob Wilson next year. I'm very excited about that.
I'm sure many people are excited to see what you have in store for them in the future. We have to leave it there, I'm afraid, but thank you, Lucinda, so much for coming in to talk to us today.
Thank you.
Don't forget, you can catch Lucinda's production Dance at the Théâtre de la Ville until the 25th of October. We're going to leave you now with some images of another dance Lucinda choreographed, Tempo Ficino. Don't forget, you can get more culture news on our website, Twitter and Facebook. Until next time, enjoy.